Have you ever wondered why life sometimes pulls you out of your comfort zone? Why relationships that once thrived suddenly falter? Why opportunities you relied upon seem to fade away? It feels unsettling, doesn't it? But let me tell you something profound. Discomfort often precedes destiny. When God is preparing you for growth, He will change your environment. This isn't about punishment, it's about positioning. God's plans for your life are far greater than what you can see right now, and sometimes He has to uproot you to plant you in fertile soil where His purposes can be fulfilled. Stay with me, because by the end of this message you'll understand that every shift, every disruption, and every new environment in your life is God's intentional hand moving you closer to your divine destiny. You look at Abraham. God called him to leave his family, his homeland, and everything he knew to go to an unknown land, Genesis 12:1. Why? Because the land where he was could not sustain the greatness God had placed within him. Abraham's obedience to leave the familiar led to the establishment of a covenant that impacts us even today. Your willingness to move when God commands is the key to unlocking your divine inheritance. In Exodus, the Israelites grew comfortable in Egypt, even in slavery. Sometimes the familiar chains of a stagnant environment seem better than the risks of an unknown promise. But God's love wouldn't allow them to settle. He changed their environment through deliverance, forcing them into a wilderness where they could learn dependence on Him. Don't despise the wilderness. It's often the place where God builds character, faith, and endurance. Consider Joseph. God allowed his brothers to sell him into slavery, a drastic change in his environment. From a favored son to a prisoner, Joseph's journey seemed unfair. Yet every shift was strategic. From Potiphar's house to the prison, and finally to Pharaoh's palace, Joseph's environment changed to prepare him for leadership. God is changing your environment to prepare you for your next level. What you see as loss, He sees as preparation. Jonah resisted God's call to change his environment, and his disobedience landed him in the belly of a great fish. Resistance to God's divine shifts can lead to delays and unnecessary detours. But even in those moments, God's mercy prevails. When Jonah finally aligned with God's plan, his assignment was completed and lives were saved. Don't fight what God is shifting, flow with it. Hebrews 11:8 tells us that by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to go out to a place he would later receive as an inheritance. Faith is the currency that moves you through God's transitions. You don't need to see the whole picture, just trust the one who holds it. So when a gardener plants a tree, sometimes it has to be transplanted to a better location for it to flourish. God does the same with us. Psalm 1:3 says the righteous are like trees planted by streams of water. If your current environment is drying up, God will move you to a place where His living water flows freely, enabling you to thrive. The changes in your life are not random, they are purposeful. God is orchestrating every shift to align you with His divine will. Embrace the process, trust the movement, and remember, God's ultimate goal is to see you grow into the fullness of your potential. So when you let go of the familiar and trust God's hand, you'll discover that every transition was designed to bring you closer to your destiny. So when God changes your environment, don't fear, step into it boldly, knowing that He is guiding you into greater things. Growth often requires discomfort because true transformation rarely happens in the comfort of the familiar. When God shifts your surroundings, it can feel unsettling, even painful, but it's necessary for your development. Imagine a seed planted in soil. Before it can grow into a thriving plant, it must first break out of its hard shell, pushing through the dirt and into the open air. That process isn't easy, it's a struggle, but it's the only way the seed can fulfill its potential. In the same way, God often uses changes in your environment to break the barriers holding you back and to position you for the next stage of your purpose. Sometimes the very place that feels comfortable and secure becomes the greatest obstacle to your growth. The people, habits, or systems that once supported you may no longer provide what you need to move forward. God knows this, and because he loves you, he will shift your environment not to harm you, but to stretch you, to challenge you, and to prepare you for the future he has planned. It's in these moments of discomfort, when God moves you out of the known and into the unknown, that your faith is tested and your character is refined. You may not understand it at first, but every change, every closed door, and every new direction is part of God's perfect plan to help you grow into the person he created you to be. Your current environment may be nurturing your stagnation rather than your destiny. It's possible to become so comfortable in a place, a relationship, or a routine that you fail to realize it's no longer serving your growth. What once felt like a blessing can become a hindrance when it keeps you from stepping into the fullness of your purpose. God sees what you cannot, and in his infinite wisdom, he will shift you out of an environment that no longer aligns with his plans for your life. Think of the Israelites in Egypt. For a time, Egypt was a place of provision, a refuge during a famine. But eventually, what had been a blessing became a place of bondage. They grew stagnant in slavery, forgetting the promises of God because they had adapted to their circumstances. It took a divine intervention to move them out of their comfort zone, even though that meant stepping into an uncertain wilderness. Sometimes God has to disrupt the familiar to redirect you toward your destiny. When you find yourself in a season where things feel out of place or opportunities are drying up, it could be God signaling that it's time for a change. He may be calling you to leave behind what feels safe and step into a new environment where you can truly thrive and fulfill the purpose he has for you. Biblical examples reveal that God relocates people to align them with his plans. Throughout Scripture, we see a recurring pattern. When God desires to do something extraordinary in someone's life, he often begins by shifting their environment. This isn't a random action, but a deliberate move to position them where they can grow, mature, and fulfill their divine purpose. Take Abraham, for example. He was called to leave everything familiar, his family, his land, and his culture. God told him in Genesis 12:1, go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. You notice that God didn't give Abraham a map or a detailed plan. He simply asked him to trust and obey. Why? Because the environment Abraham was in could no longer support the destiny God had for him. The land of his forefathers was too small for the vision God wanted to birth through him, a nation that would bless the entire earth. You look also at Joseph. As a young man, Joseph had dreams of greatness, but his environment, his father's house, was not the place where those dreams could be realized. God allowed his brothers to sell him into slavery, an act that seemed cruel and unjust at the time. However, this change in environment was part of God's larger plan. Each stage of Joseph's journey from Potiphar's house to prison to Pharaoh's palace was carefully orchestrated to prepare him for leadership and to place him in a position where he could save an entire nation from famine. Even Jesus experienced the power of relocation. As a child, he was taken to Egypt to escape King Herod's decree. This shift in environment was not just about protection, it was part of fulfilling prophecy and aligning Jesus with his mission. Later during his ministry, Jesus would often retreat to solitary places, changing his environment temporarily to recharge and connect with the Father. God's relocations are never accidental. They are always purposeful. When he moves you, it's because he sees the bigger picture, one that you might not understand in the moment. Sometimes the environment you are in can no longer sustain your growth. It may be filled with people or systems that limit you, distract you, or hold you back from your potential. God, in his wisdom, removes you from that place not to punish you, but to prepare you. You think about a plant in a small pot. Initially, that pot is perfect for nurturing the plant's roots and allowing it to grow. But over time, the plant outgrows the pot. If it remains in the same confined space, its roots will become tangled. It will stop thriving. To grow further, it must be transplanted to a larger environment. The process of being uprooted might seem harsh, but it's necessary for the plant's survival and flourishing. In the same way, God shifts you to a place where your roots can spread, and you can thrive. When your environment changes, it's often an invitation from God to trust Him on a deeper level. It's a call to embrace the unfamiliar, to step into new opportunities, and to rely on His guidance. These changes may not always be easy, but they are always for your good. God is aligning you with His purpose, even when it feels like everything around you is shifting. Trust that His hand is leading you to a place where you can grow into the fullness of who He created you to be. Resistance to change can delay your breakthrough. Embrace God's divine transitions. Many of us cling tightly to what is familiar, even when it no longer serves us. This resistance is often rooted in fear of the unknown, fear of failure, or fear of losing control. But when we resist the changes God is orchestrating, we risk delaying the blessings He has prepared for us. You look at Jonah. God called him to leave his environment and go to Nineveh, deliver a message of repentance. Instead of obeying, Jonah resisted and fled in the opposite direction. His resistance led him to a stormy sea, a shipwreck, and the belly of a great fish. Jonah's refusal to embrace God's transition didn't change God's plan, it only prolonged the process. In the end, Jonah still had to go to Nineveh, but his resistance brought unnecessary pain and delay. This story illustrates an important truth: God's plans for your life are unchanging. But your cooperation determines how quickly they unfold. When you resist His leading, you may find yourself stuck in situations that feel chaotic or overwhelming, much like Jonah in the storm. These moments aren't punishment, they are God's way of redirecting you toward His will. The sooner you surrender to His guidance, the sooner you'll experience the breakthrough you've been praying for. The Israelites offer another powerful example. When God delivered them from Egypt, He intended for them to enter the promised land quickly. Yet their resistance, doubt, and complaints turned an 11-day journey into a 40-year wilderness experience. They resisted change because they were still clinging to the mindset of slavery, even though God was leading them to freedom. Their fear of the unknown caused them to delay their own destiny. Resistance often comes when we don't fully trust God's plan. We hold on to what feels secure, even if it's limiting us, because we can't see the bigger picture. But here's the truth: God's ways are higher than our ways. Isaiah 55:8-9. He sees what we cannot. And His transitions are always designed for our good. When we resist, we're essentially telling God that we know better than He does, which only leads to frustration and stagnation. Embracing God's transitions requires faith. It means trusting that He knows what He's doing, even when the path is unclear. It means believing that His plans are to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you hope and a future. Jeremiah 29:11. And it means letting go of your need to control the process and allowing Him to lead. You remember, God's divine transitions are not designed to harm you, but to prepare you. The changes you fear are often the very tools He uses to shape your character, strengthen your faith, and position you for your purpose. Don't let resistance hold you back from the life God has called you to live. Embrace His plan and watch as He transforms every transition into a testimony of His faithfulness and power. And when God changes your environment, it might feel like rejection, but it's actually redirection toward His purpose. Often, when doors close or relationships end, we feel abandoned or defeated. We question why things didn't work out or why God allowed certain situations to fall apart. However, what may seem like rejection to you is often God's way of redirecting you to something far greater than you could have imagined. Consider the story of Ruth. After losing her husband, Ruth faced an environment filled with grief and uncertainty. She could have stayed in Moab, clinging to her past and what was familiar. But God used her loss as a divine setup for a new direction. And by choosing to follow Naomi to Bethlehem, Ruth aligned herself with God's plan. Her environment changed dramatically from the fields of Moab to the fields of Boz, but it was in this new place that she stepped into her purpose. She became part of the lineage of Jesus Christ, all because she embraced the redirection. God's redirection isn't always comfortable, but it is always purposeful. When Elijah was by the brook of Cherith, God provided for him through ravens and water from the brook. But eventually, the brook dried up. This wasn't a sign that God had abandoned Elijah. It was God's way of redirecting him to Zarephath, where a widow was waiting to sustain him. The dry brook was a divine signal that it was time for Elijah to move. If Elijah had stayed by the dry brook, he would have missed the provision and purpose awaiting him in the next place. So when God changes your environment, it's crucial to shift your perspective. Instead of viewing it as rejection, see it as divine protection and preparation. God is closing doors not to punish you, but to protect you from staying in a place that no longer serves his purpose for your life. That job you didn't get, that opportunity that slipped away, or that relationship that ended, all of these are part of God's redirection to align you with his perfect plan. God's redirection is also a sign of his love. He cares too much about your destiny to leave you in a place that no longer supports your growth. Just as a gardener prunes a plant to encourage new growth, God removes what is no longer fruitful in your life so that you can flourish. It may be painful in the moment, but the result is a life that is more aligned with his purpose and glory. So when you feel like life is rejecting you, pause and consider this is God redirecting you. Instead of resisting the change, embrace it with faith. Trust that he is leading you to a better place, a place where you can grow, thrive, and fulfill the purpose he has set before you. What looks like a loss today may be the first step toward your greatest breakthrough. So when God changes your environment, it can reveal strengths and gifts you didn't know you had. Sometimes it takes a new setting, a new challenge, or a new opportunity for you to realize the potential God has placed within you. These hidden abilities may lie dormant in the comfort of your familiar surroundings, but when you're placed in a situation that stretches you, they begin to emerge. Consider Moses. For the first 40 years of his life, he lived as a prince of Egypt, surrounded by wealth and privilege. But it wasn't until he fled to the wilderness of Midian that his true calling began to unfold. In the solitude of that desert, God prepared Moses for leadership. The skills he learned as a shepherd, guiding, protecting, and leading sheep would later be used to lead an entire nation out of bondage. Moses didn't know he was capable of such a monumental task until God placed him in an environment that revealed his potential. Think about David. He was a simple shepherd boy, overlooked by his family and underestimated by those around him. But when God called him to face Goliath, something extraordinary happened. In the face of an intimidating giant, David's courage, faith, and skill with a sling were revealed. It wasn't in the comfort of the pasture, but in the challenge of the battlefield that David's gifts were fully displayed. That moment of environmental shift was the catalyst for his rise to kingship. Even the disciples of Jesus experienced this. Many of them were fishermen, accustomed to the rhythm of casting nets and hauling in fish. Yet when Jesus called them to leave their boats and follow him, they discovered gifts they never knew they had: preaching, healing, and leading the early church. It was in the new environment of walking with Jesus that their true purpose and abilities came to light. God often places us in environments that challenge us because he knows what lies within us, even when we don't. He knows the talents, strengths, and spiritual gifts he has given you, and he wants to bring them to the surface. But this can only happen when you step out of your comfort zone and into the unknown. It's in those moments of uncertainty and stretching that you begin to see what God has placed inside you. When God shifts your environment, it may feel overwhelming at first. You might doubt your ability to handle the new challenges or responsibilities. But remember this: God never calls you to a place without equipping you for it. Philippians 4:13 says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. The very challenges that feel insurmountable are the ones God uses to reveal his power at work within you. When God shifts your environment, he often removes distractions to sharpen your focus on him. Life can be full of noise, demands, relationships, routines, and even comforts that cloud our vision of God's plan. Sometimes we get so caught up in the busyness of our surroundings that we miss the voice of the one who's guiding us. So God in his wisdom may move us to a new place, strip away distractions, and create space for us to hear him clearly. When God removes distractions, it can feel like loss. The things we once relied on, our routines, relationships, or even our achievements, may suddenly seem distant or unavailable. But this is not a loss, it's a divine opportunity. By clearing the noise, God is creating space for you to focus on what truly matters, your relationship with him and the purpose he has for your life. Jesus himself modeled this principle. Before he began his public ministry, he spent 40 days in the wilderness. During this time, he was free from the distractions of daily life and able to fully focus on communion with the Father. This period of preparation was essential for the powerful work he was about to do. Jesus knew that in order to move forward in his mission, he needed time alone with God. When your environment changes and distractions are stripped away, it's an invitation to go deeper. God is drawing you closer, teaching you to rely on him more fully, and helping you to discern his will. Psalm 46:10 says, "Be still and know that I am God." This stillness is not inactivity, but intentional focus, a turning away from distractions and a turning toward God. In the quietness of a new environment, you will find clarity. You'll begin to see what truly matters and align your priorities with God's. This sharpening of focus is not just for your benefit, but for the benefit of those around you. When your heart and mind are fixed on him, you become a vessel through which his purpose can flow freely. Consider Abraham, who was called to leave his homeland, his family, and everything familiar to go to a place that God would show him. Abraham didn't have a map or a detailed plan. All he had was a promise. His change in his environment forced him to rely entirely on God's guidance. Every step he took was an act of faith, and through this journey, Abraham became the father of nations and a model of unwavering trust in God. The same principle is evident in Peter's experience. When Jesus called him to step out of the boat and walk on water, Peter was faced with a decision. The safety of the boat represented his comfort zone, but the waves outside represented the unknown. Peter's faith was stretched when he chose to trust Jesus and step into the impossible. Even though he faltered momentarily, that experience deepened his understanding of God's power and faithfulness. God often uses new environments to teach us lessons we cannot learn in our comfort zones. In times of change, our natural inclination is to lean on our own understanding, but Proverbs 3:5-6 reminds us to trust in the Lord with all our heart and not depend on our limited perspective. When the familiar crumbles and the path ahead seems unclear, these are the moments when we discover that God is truly all we need. God allows these shifts because he wants your faith to move beyond words and into action. James 2:17 tells us that faith without works is dead. When God calls you into the unknown, it's an opportunity to live out your faith in real, tangible ways. It's a chance to step into the promises he has for you, even when you can't see how everything will unfold. The beauty of these moments is that as your faith is stretched, so is your capacity to receive God's blessings. You begin to trust him not only for what he can do, but for who he is. Your relationship with him grows deeper, and your reliance on him becomes the foundation of your life. So if you find yourself in an unfamiliar environment, don't be discouraged. God is not punishing you, he is preparing you. He is taking you to a new level of faith, a place where you will see his power and provision in ways you've never experienced before. Embrace the stretching, for it is the process that will lead you to your purpose and his glory. Consider Joseph's journey. He went from being his father's favorite son in Canaan to a slave in Egypt, then to a prisoner, and finally to the palace. Each change in Joseph's environment seemed like a setback, but in reality, it was a setup. The pit prepared him for Potiphar's house prepared him for the prison, and the prison prepared him for the palace. Through every shift, God was positioning Joseph to fulfill his purpose of saving nations during a time of famine. Had Joseph stayed in Canaan, he never would have accessed the opportunities that awaited him in Egypt. Divine opportunities often exist in places outside our comfort zones. God may shift you geographically, relationally, or professionally, not to confuse or frustrate you, but to position you strategically. So when the Israelites were delivered from Egypt, God didn't take them directly to the promised land. Instead, he led them through the wilderness. Why? Because the wilderness was a necessary environment for transformation and preparation. It was there that God positioned them to receive his law, learn dependence on him, and strengthen their faith for the battles ahead. These opportunities are often disguised as challenges. Esther's shift from being a simple Jewish girl to the Queen of Persia came with its own risks and uncertainties. Yet, in that position, God gave her the opportunity to save her people. Had Esther not embraced the change, she would have missed the divine moment when God used her for such a time as this. God is always working behind the scenes to align your environment with his plans. Even when the shift feels uncomfortable, he is orchestrating circumstances to open doors that no one can shut. Revelation 3:8 reminds us of this truth. See, I have set before you an open door, which no one is able to shut. The new environment is where God's provision, connections, and favor will manifest in ways you could never imagine. Your part is to trust and obey. When God moves you, it's not enough to simply relocate physically. You must also align spiritually. Be sensitive to his leading and remain open to his direction. Pray for discernment to recognize the opportunities he places before you. Be like Joshua and Caleb. Have the faith to see the promised land even when others see giants. Seize the opportunities God gives you with courage and confidence. So don't fear the change. Embrace it as the divine positioning it truly is. Trust that God is placing you exactly where you need to be to fulfill the purpose he has designed for you. The opportunities ahead are greater than the comforts you leave behind. Step into the new environment with faith and watch how God uses it to bring his promises to pass in your life.